The scene unfolds on a vast battlefield where a massive army stands with unwavering determination, marking the age of great war in a realm where strength alone defines law and truth as countless warriors clash and spill blood across the land. At the pinnacle of martial and military might stood Azura, the conqueror who had dominated the world through absolute power. As he faced the army alone, a commander mounted on horseback confronted him, calling him mad for coming this far just to throw his life away and questioning whether this was the purpose behind Azura's arrival. The commander further declared that even someone as powerful as Azura could not defeat an army of 100,000 soldiers by himself and demanded to know what scheme had brought him there alone. Azura showed no fear, calmly repeating the mention of 100,000 soldiers as if it meant nothing to him, dismissing such numbers as irrelevant and instead accusing the commander of relying on meaningless numerical advantage rather than true strength, which was why he would never be able to defeat Azura as long as he lived. Enraged by the insult, the commander accused Azura of having no honor and limitless arrogance before ordering his troops to kill him immediately. The army charged forward all at once, surrounding Azura, who stood motionless despite appearing unarmed and alone. When the assault reached him, Azura unleashed a single devastating attack forged from overwhelming martial mastery, an attack so powerful that it tore through the battlefield and annihilated the charging army, leaving none capable of resisting the destruction that followed. The devastating power of Azura's single attack shattered the landscape into countless fragments, leaving destruction stretching across the battlefield. Even the legendary masters who once dominated the era fell one after another before the overwhelming might of the man known as the strongest. In time, the world was unified under the banner of the Azura kingdom, marking the completion of his conquest over the heavens. The scene then shifted to Muon, the capital of the Azura kingdom, where towering structures rose majestically across the land while the kingdom's scenery radiated beauty and grandeur. Within the city, a group of people bowed their heads in reverence as they celebrated their sovereign's achievement. At that moment, a silver-haired woman named Imowul spoke, remarking that with the Lord's victory over countless enemies and the unification of the Central Plains, there was nothing left in the world to fear. Azura turned his gaze toward her with a menacing expression, calling her name before coldly demanding to know her purpose for summoning him. Imowul stated that Azura was the only king in history to unify the Central Plains solely through martial strength, and that even the title of martial god would be insufficient to describe the world's greatest fist king. To match his unparalleled prestige, she revealed that she wished to present him with a secret martial manual, explaining that he had been brought there specifically for that reason. She further claimed that only Azura possessed the ability to control the immense power hidden within the manual. In the center of the hall, a golden cup filled with a crimson liquid was displayed. Azura's curiosity was stirred by the mention of the secret manual, and he slowly reached toward the golden cup. As he did so, the red fluid inside began to swirl around his hand, and a single drop of his own blood fell into the vessel. In that instant, several steel chains erupted from the golden cup and surged toward Azura, rapidly wrapping around his arms and legs before he could react. The chains tightened around his body as Azura stared in surprise at the unexpected development, while Imowul declared that his era of tyranny would end there and that the Azura kingdom would soon fall under new rule. Imowul stated that it was futile for Azura to attempt escape, as even the strongest warrior would remain powerless before the infinite abyss. Azura remained silent, showing no reaction to her words, though Imowul continued and urged him to surrender immediately. However, the steel chains binding Azura suddenly began to fracture and break apart under his overwhelming strength. Azura called Imowul's name, questioning whether she had forgotten the identity of the man before her, declaring that he was the very embodiment of heaven's mandate and the force of destruction itself. Alarmed by the sudden turn of events, Imowul turned toward her subordinates and demanded that the barrier of the infinite abyss be activated without delay. At that same moment, Azura gathered his power and prepared a fist strike meant to annihilate Imowul, only to find crimson fluid once again surging around and constricting his body. Azura was momentarily stunned as the red fluid restrained him, preventing his attack when victory had been mere inches away. A magical circle then formed beneath his feet and began pulling him downward with immense force as he struggled to break free from its pull. A red beam of light erupted outward, and when it vanished, Azura was no longer present, having been dragged into the unknown depths beyond. Wool stood motionless, gazing at the fading magic circle etched into the ground while her subordinates also remained still, saying nothing. After several moments of silence, the subordinates knelt before Wool and bowed their heads, acknowledging her as their lord and celebrating her rise as the new queen of the Azura kingdom. Wool simply stood there in quiet satisfaction, observing the outcome without speaking. Just like that, the life of the Fist King Azura, who once ruled the world, came to a hollow and empty end. At the same moment, a system notification appeared before a young man, informing him that he had been summoned as a player and asking whether he wished to join. No response came, which confused the system, prompting it to urge the player to press the accept button quickly. However, a powerful fist suddenly struck the notification screen, shattering and cracking the system interface. The young man stood there looking bewildered, unsure of what had just occurred while feeling an overwhelming and ominous energy surrounding him. At that moment, a voice called out to him, warning him to be careful as a massive red dragon charged directly toward Udah. Reacting quickly, Udah drew his sword and used it to block the incoming attack, though the impact was so powerful that he was pushed backward. The red dragon then unleashed its Inferno Breath, a devastating attack that required a 2-second charging time before firing a massive beam of destructive fire. Udah was surprised by the sudden assault as another system notification appeared, identifying the Inferno Breath skill as activated while a combat analysis program, labeled as Climber Strategy, began evaluating the attack. Once the analysis was complete, Udah prepared himself to counter the skill as the system automatically initiated the countermeasure. Gripping his sword tightly, Udah cleaved the dragon's attack into 2 separate halves before launching himself high into the air and activating the powerful Heavenly Judgment skill against the dragon. As the skill was used, a notification appeared showing that Heavenly Judgment still had 9 remaining uses. The dragon's body was struck repeatedly across multiple locations before exploding into fragments, and the system announced that the quest had been completed with Udah's victory over the 998 floor boss known as Inferno Balrog. The final quest then appeared, instructing him to reach the top of the tower and achieve complete conquest. Udah stared at the dragon's disintegrating body and muttered that the battle had been extremely close. At that moment, a small floating girl asked Udah what was wrong, noticing that he had spaced out earlier, and reminded him that only the top floor of the tower remained. She urged him to hurry so they could finish the tower conquest and return to see their families. Udah agreed, stating that they had to clear the tower no matter what. It had already been 3 years since Udah was summoned to this world, and during that time he had focused solely on one objective, reaching the top of the tower. Now that only the final stage remained, an unfamiliar sense of uneasiness lingered in his heart, though he could not determine its source. While lost in thought, the small girl called out to him again, asking if something was wrong. Placing his hands against the massive door before him, Udah forced himself to remain composed, reminding himself that he had come too far to allow doubt to consume him. The girl asked once more if he was truly fine, and Udah answered that he was, adding that they should proceed inside. He believed that whatever awaited him at the final stage could not surpass his current statistics, and he was determined to return to his original world once everything was finished. However, the entity that appeared before his eyes for a brief moment was something so terrifying that it felt overwhelming, though it quickly changed into the form of an old man, none other than Azura himself. Azura looked at Udah and asked who he was, while Udah, equally confused by the situation, questioned the presence of a random old man in such a place. Udah wondered if the elderly man standing before him was the final boss. Azura glanced around the surroundings, wondering where he had been trapped, and concluded that Wool had truly sealed him inside this place. Hearing the man speak, Udah judged him to be an opponent of exceptional intelligence and immediately drew his weapon, deciding not to underestimate him simply because of his human appearance, since regardless of outward form, the being standing before him was the final monster guarding the end of the tower. Without wasting any time, Udah charged directly toward Azura, intending to end the battle quickly and decisively from the very beginning. He believed that victory would be secured if he finished the fight immediately, but Azura evaded the attack with an almost imperceptibly small movement. Udah did not stop his assault and immediately followed up with another strike aimed directly at Azura, landing a powerful blow, yet Azura remained completely unmoved. Udah then launched a downward attack from above, declaring internally that this would be the end, and activated the Heavenly Judgment skill to strike Azura directly. A system notification appeared, indicating that only 8 uses of Heavenly Judgment remained. After landing the attack, Udah briefly believed that the final boss was far weaker than he had expected, but at that moment Azura spoke, addressing him as a brat and questioning his actions. Udah was shocked to see that the entity before him was still standing without even a single scratch, having blocked his ultimate skill with just one hand. Udah pulled his weapon back, causing Azura to release his grip on the weapon he was holding. Udah then acknowledged that this level of power was expected from the final boss. Activating the Climber's Strategy Guide, Udah waited as the analytical program completed its assessment, eventually displaying a victory probability of approximately 87.86%. Meanwhile, Azura continued blocking the attacks calmly. At that moment, Azura spoke, ordering Udah to stop, and the system interface immediately began displaying error messages while updating the battle prediction, drastically reducing the calculated success rate to 0.43%. Udah was shocked to see that the success rate had fallen below 1%, realizing that he had never before encountered an enemy of such overwhelming strength. He questioned inwardly the identity of the old man standing before him. Azura then spoke, telling Udah not to be afraid, explaining that he did not engage in battle with opponents he deemed unworthy of fighting. Udah was startled to hear that he was considered unworthy of combat. Azura further stated that with Udah's current level of skill, even a single punch from him would be wasted. Wearing a serious expression, Azura then asked Udah about the nature of this place. Hearing those words, Udah smirked, believing that he had finally understood why neither Heavenly Judgment nor the Climber's Strategy Guide had worked. He concluded that the stage itself required him to prove his true strength before he could inflict meaningful damage, and he burst in a loud laughter as he realized that a hidden mechanism had been placed within the trial. Udah continued explaining that only by demonstrating his true worth could he deal damage, and that this was the core rule governing the stage. Preparing himself, Udah activated his trait skill, temporarily raising all of his statistics to their maximum limits, before charging toward Azura and declaring internally that he would unleash the absolute peak power granted by the system's stat enhancement. As Udah drew closer, Azura observed a status window displaying Udah's fully maximized statistics, and upon seeing it, he stated that Udah should never have tried to discuss strength using such insignificant numerical values. Azura clenched his fist, remarking that measuring strength through a blue window filled with numbers was deeply contemptible. With a grave expression, Azura declared that he no longer cared about the nature of this place, and as he spoke, he began charging his own attack, stating internally that he would start by shattering Udah's distorted perception of power before tearing everything apart to correct it. Udah swung his weapon with all his remaining strength, while Azura mirrored the movement, announcing internally that he would first destroy the contemptible blue status window floating before him. The status interface instantly shattered into countless fragments under the force of the attack, and at the same time, Azura's strike sent Udah flying backward at high speed. Udah lay injured and stunned by the unexpected outcome, watching in shock as his own status window fractured and gradually faded while continuously displaying error messages indicating that the system had suffered critical damage. He was astonished that such an event was even possible, finding the situation completely absurd. The system interface then reported that all stored statistics were being erased, that data recovery attempts had failed, and that system shutdown was currently in progress. Standing tall, Azura asked Udah if he now understood reality, declaring that true strength could not be quantified through numerical displays, and with a menacing smile he announced that the long and exhausting game of relying on numbers would end immediately. Udah could only stare at Azura in stunned silence, and in that moment, his level was forcibly reset to level 1, leaving Udah overwhelmed and tearful as he uttered a single apology. 3 years earlier, Udah had been summoned into a mysterious tower where he climbed alongside many companions, though he alone survived the journey. Sitting on the ground, Udah called out to his flying companion Nova, asking whether returning to their original world would be possible if the tower were conquered. He expressed his growing unease the more he reflected on the situation, noting that they were being sent forward blindly, without knowing what dangers awaited them. And he questioned whether climbing the tower was meaningful if nothing could be guaranteed. Nova agreed with Udah's words, acknowledging that even if they succeeded in climbing the tower, returning to their original world might still be impossible. However, Nova reminded Udah that Ashwa had told them that their chosen path carried meaning and that every journey they undertook was bound to have significance, assuring him that Udah's journey would ultimately hold an important purpose. Returning to the present, Azura wore a menacing smile and declared internally that the exhausting game centered around numerical strength would end at that moment. Udah lay on the ground in shock, slowly realizing that everything he had believed about himself, this world, and his purpose might have been fundamentally wrong. Panicking, Udah attempted to summon his status window, inventory, and quest interface, but nothing responded, leaving only suffocating silence in their place. He could not accept that his stat window had truly vanished, repeatedly muttering the command to reboot the system within his mind while struggling to comprehend the impossibility of the situation. Observing Udah's behavior, Azura dismissed it as pathetic, questioning whether Udah was still trapped inside the distorted game of numerical power and stating that the repulsive blue windows would never appear again. Trembling in fear, Udah pleaded for mercy. However, Azura repeated that he had no interest in killing someone who was not even worthy of being fought. Azura crouched down and demanded that Udah answer his question about the nature of this place and what must be done to return to his original world. Udah speculated that the man standing before him might also be a player, and he admitted that he himself did not know the method of returning home. Aside from clearing the final stage, no other known path existed. Azura questioned what Udah meant by clearing the final stage, finding the explanation nonsensical. Hearing this, Udah made a strange expression, briefly wondering whether the man before him had come from an era as distant as the Joseon period. After considering how best to explain the situation, Udah simplified the explanation, stating that Azura's task was to clear the entire tower. Clearing the entire tower meant conquering every floor from the first to the topmost level without leaving a single stage uncleared. Looking troubled, Udah added that if Azura was truly a player, he should begin completing quests slowly and systematically. Hearing this, Azura smiled confidently and declared internally that if that was the case, he would shatter the entire tower into pieces. Udah was shocked upon hearing Azura's declaration and immediately told him that destroying the tower was not the correct meaning of clearing it. However, Azura paid no further attention and drove his fist into the tower floor, triggering a massive explosion that spread across every level of the structure. From the outside, it became visible that each floor of the tower was collapsing and disintegrating under the force of the attack, leaving Udah stunned by what he was witnessing. As Udah fell rapidly toward the lower floors, he angrily shouted at Azura, questioning why he was needlessly destroying an intact tower. At the same time, a red system notification appeared, reporting a critical error and confirming that the tower had been destroyed by an abnormal entity. As the explosions continued spreading through every level, Udah struggled to comprehend the identity of the old man, finding it impossible to believe that the tower could be shattered using nothing but bare hands. While still falling, Nova suddenly called out to him and quickly rushed forward, grabbing the back of his collar just in time to prevent him from plummeting further toward the lowest depths. Feeling relieved, Udah asked where Nova had been all this time, believing that she had disappeared. Nova apologized, explaining that she had been delayed because she went to retrieve Udah's sword. More importantly, she warned that they needed to escape immediately because something far more dangerous was about to occur. Hearing this, Udah questioned what Nova meant by something big, wondering what could possibly be worse than the current situation. At that moment, a purple system notification appeared, indicating that abnormal access had been detected and that all data related to the destroyed tower would be erased. As the message was displayed, a massive black hole materialized out of nowhere, beginning to absorb everything within its vicinity, including the collapsing tower debris. Udah stared at the phenomenon, unable to identify what the black hole was, but instinctively understood that being pulled inside would be extremely dangerous. The system then reported that the storage space for discarded data was nearly full and that any information that could not be deleted would be forcibly released into the outside world. At that moment, Azura casually stomped on the black hole and stood atop it as if the phenomenon did not exist, glancing downward and remarking internally that it felt like he had simply stepped on something insignificant, briefly wondering whether it was merely his imagination. He then changed the subject, questioning why nothing had happened and stating that, just as the brat had said, he had successfully cleared the tower. Udah immediately shouted at Azura, insisting that this was not the correct meaning of clearing the tower. He further added that even for someone like a combat prodigy of Azura's level, the situation had gone too far, and he questioned whether Azura truly intended to continue destroying everything in sight. Udah was about to warn that they did not know what catastrophic consequences might arise if the destruction continued. But at that moment, a purple beam of light erupted from the ground, expanding rapidly, as if preparing to summon a final boss-level entity. Udah watched in shock as a voice echoed through the area, announcing that a successor had finally been found, though an uninvited intruder had also appeared. A woman then manifested before them, and Azura was visibly surprised upon recognizing her as Emoul, the same woman who had betrayed him and sent him into this unknown world. Wearing a confident expression, the woman asked whether Azura was the rude individual who had destroyed her tower. Gritting his teeth in fury, Azura charged directly toward Emoul, declaring internally that he had finally found her hiding place and was enraged by her betrayal. However, just as his attack was about to strike, the woman raised a single hand, releasing a powerful force that pinned Azura down while cracking the ground beneath him, prompting Udah to call out Azura's name in alarm and concern. Maintaining control over Azura with her power, the woman repeated her question, asking whether Azura was indeed the one who had destroyed her tower. Observing the scene, Udah concluded that it was impossible for the woman to have subdued the monstrous old man with a single blow, and he began to suspect that the woman standing before him might be Ashwa, the figure Nova had mentioned earlier. Azura dragged his hands across the ground as he slowly stood up, stating that the woman before him was different from the Emoul he had once known. He added that the Emoul he remembered had never possessed such strange and unfamiliar powers, and based on her manner of speech, it was clear that she was the true architect of the accursed tower. Smiling menacingly, Azura questioned whether the entire disgusting game built around numerical strength was her doing. He then shouted that he had followed everything they had demanded, clearing the cursed tower and destroying the hateful number-based system, and demanded that she immediately send him back to his original kingdom. The woman appeared briefly startled before bursting into loud laughter, finding Azura highly amusing, and asked who had given him the absurd notion that clearing the tower would guarantee a return to his original world. Hearing this, Udah and Nova exchanged puzzled looks. The woman then declared that whether it was the tower itself or the status window system, Azura was free to destroy them as much as he wished. Raising her hand, she summoned a concentrated purple spherical energy and informed Azura that if he truly managed to obliterate everything she had created, she would send him back to the world he came from, though it would not be an easy task. At that moment, numerous players began appearing before Udah, as the system reported that a portion of the discarded data stored in the trash bin space was being restored, resulting in the generation of artificial or dummy players. Udah watched in shock as the bodies of his fallen comrades, players who had once died during the tower climb, began regenerating before his eyes, leaving him overwhelmed and questioning the reality of what was unfolding. With a menacing smile, the woman stated that the number of towers Azura had to destroy in the future was still far greater, implying that the challenges in this world were far from over. At that moment, the resurrected players began moving again, and one of them called out Udah's name, startling him. The man urged Udah to hurry and continue climbing the tower together. The woman then spoke, declaring that regardless of Azura's strength, the balance of the world would not collapse so easily. Overcome by rage, Udah immediately gathered his energy and launched a powerful attack toward the woman without hesitation, though the strike proved useless as a defensive barrier blocked the assault completely. Seeing Udah, the woman asked who the insignificant being attacking her was. Burning with anger, Udah questioned the meaning of the situation, believing that his comrades had been dead. He insisted that the individuals before him were comrades who had risked their lives alongside him during the tower climb, and he was furious that they were being treated in such a manner. He further stated that this was the very reason she had brought them into the tower. As soon as he finished speaking, the woman raised her hand and activated her gravitational power, sending Udah flying backward at high speed. The woman then explained that Udah was merely a component required to complete her ideal world, adding that the world she had created remained unstable and could not exist without his power. This was the reason she had forced Udah to climb the tower by assigning him fabricated missions disguised as quests. Udah felt intense fury knowing that everything had been orchestrated solely for that purpose. The woman then declared that she had no more interest in dealing with someone who had lost all remaining power and announced that Udah should vanish immediately. As the woman prepared to activate her attack, Udah, with tears in his eyes, cursed the life he had lived, blaming himself for everything that had happened and regretting that he had never climbed the foolish tower in the first place. Burning with anger, he inwardly wished that he had been stronger and more intelligent, believing that if he had possessed greater power and wisdom, he could have defeated the woman. While consumed by such thoughts, the next scene unfolded, revealing one of the woman's arms flying through the air after being violently severed from her body, shocking her as she struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. A trail of destructive energy extended upward from Azura, indicating that he was the one who had launched the attack against the woman. The woman stood stunned by the sudden assault. Azura then approached Udah and stated that Udah had once again earned his respect. With a playful smile, Azura joked that the woman had been Azura's prey first before becoming Udah's target. Udah was surprised by the statement as Azura continued, acknowledging Udah's courage, but emphasizing that it was still too early for him. Azura declared that he would personally take the woman's head, asserting that he alone would deliver the finishing blow. With those words, he charged forward and drove his fist into the woman's head, forcing her body toward the ground. As the dust settled, Azura was seen standing with his arm wrapped around the woman's neck. The woman showed no fear, maintaining a calm smile, while acknowledging that Azura was truly impressive for displaying such overwhelming strength without relying on any system support. However, she soon raised her hand and activated a spell, stating that she would not allow his power to run unchecked. Azura was confused by the sudden action and irritated by the woman's continued use of what he considered dishonest techniques. The woman pulled Azura's face closer to hers and told him that he should conquer every tower scattered across the world, promising that she would wait for him at the highest point of existence. The moment she finished speaking, the spell reached completion and she vanished from sight, leaving Azura standing alone while staring silently at the ground. At that moment, Azura recalled the words Imowul had once spoken, realizing that the woman's earlier statements carried the same meaning and tone as the one he had just heard. Rising slowly, Azura concluded that the woman's appearance and behavior strongly resembled Imowul's, though the reason behind it remained unclear. He stared into the distance, questioning why Imowul had sent him to such a world in the first place. Soon afterward, the resurrected players resumed their attacks against Udah and Azura. Udah stood uncertainly, unable to decide how to respond since the attackers were the comrades he once fought alongside. Udah called out to one of his comrades, asking whether the man could no longer recognize him. But Nova warned Udah that attempting to communicate was pointless. She explained that even if recognition remained, it was merely a residual reaction caused by fragmented memories from the restoration process. Despite hearing Nova's explanation, Udah refused to accept that his comrades no longer recognized him. At that moment, Azura suddenly delivered a single, forceful punch directly into the face of one of Udah's comrades, showing no hesitation or mercy, and demanded to know what Udah was doing. Udah was shocked by the ruthless manner in which Azura struck the resurrected man, while Azura dismissed the situation as a waste of time, insisting that there was no point in fighting meaningless trivialities and urging Udah to quickly lead him toward the location of the remaining towers. Udah asked Azura to pause for a moment, explaining that the people before him were his comrades and that he could not simply abandon them. However, Azura responded seriously by questioning whether the resurrected figures truly resembled comrades in Udah's eyes. He stated that they were nothing more than vengeful spirits of the dead, and that regardless of Udah's emotional attachment, the truth would not change. Azura then told Udah that if he intended to remain entangled with these ghostly remnants, he could spend his entire life playing with wandering spirits, while Azura would proceed alone to hunt down the woman who had vanished. At that moment, several spirits attempted to attack Azura from behind, but he eliminated them in a single instant without showing any hesitation. Azura became irritated that such lowly ghosts would dare to obstruct his path, and decided to destroy them all at once since he was pressed for time. Drawing his fist backward with immense force, he unleashed a devastating punch, and for a brief moment, silence filled the battlefield. Azura immediately sensed that something was wrong because he could no longer feel any internal energy circulating within his body, leading him to suspect that his dantian had been sealed. Despite this, a menacing smile formed on his face as he found the situation increasingly interesting, realizing that they had dared to challenge Azura himself. He remained confident that no matter what the woman had done, she would not be able to stop him. As the spirits attempted another assault, Azura declared internally that even without martial arts techniques, he remained the strongest, and with a single sweep of his arm, he annihilated the incoming ghostly enemies. Launching himself high into the air, he unleashed another powerful attack that obliterated the surrounding spirits. Observing the battle, Udah concluded that the old man was indeed a monstrous opponent, fighting the endless waves of dummy players alone as expected. However, he soon realized a troubling possibility. Even with Azura's overwhelming strength, the continuously respawning dummy players meant that the battle might never truly end, and prolonged combat could eventually exhaust even a warrior of Azura's caliber. Determined to assist, Udah prepared to move, but Nova stopped him, urging him to remain calm and warning that swinging the holy sword without his statistics could cause his body to collapse under the strain, potentially resulting in his death. Udah acknowledged Nova's warning, but stated that if he did nothing, he would never be able to avenge his fallen comrades. As he spoke, he finished off one of the crawling, resurrected players approaching him, determination burning in his eyes as he resolved to act. He told Nova that regardless of the consequences, he needed to find the woman responsible for the suffering of both him and his comrades. Udah then called out to Azura, stating that he understood Azura's ability to endure the attacks even without evasion, and requested that Azura continue attracting the enemy's attention. Azura was confused by the unfamiliar term Udah used, but continued eliminating numerous spirits while warning Udah not to dare attempt giving orders to him again. Pleased that Azura, despite his anger, was still fulfilling the role of drawing enemy aggression, Udah recognized that this was his opportunity. Rising into the air, he fought back tears as he looked at the faces of his comrades, silently apologizing to them, while understanding that he had no choice but to end their existence. He activated divine punishment, annihilating the resurrected comrades before him, and vowed internally that he would avenge them no matter what path he had to walk. After the dust settled, Azura stood proudly and expressed quiet approval of Udah's performance, while Udah struggled to remain standing. Azura remarked that Udah had proven to be surprisingly useful. Taking a deep breath, Udah stated that he wanted Azura to remember one thing. The one who would kill the woman would be Udah himself. Immediately after making that declaration, Udah collapsed from exhaustion, but Azura caught him before he hit the ground. Smiling, Azura was amused that Udah had given him orders twice, and while Udah remained unconscious, Azura decided that he would reward the boy for entertaining him. Carrying Udah like a prince carrying a princess, Azura told him that if Udah ever became stronger than Azura himself, he would be given the opportunity to kill the woman, and he expressed anticipation for that future possibility. At a distance, a single foot stepped forward as an unusual figure observed the battle from afar. In the following scene, deep within the mountain range, Azura was seen meditating beneath a waterfall. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and threw a straight punch forward, releasing a tremendous surge of force that destroyed everything in its path. Azura nodded in quiet confirmation, stating internally that the result was exactly as expected since he still could not feel any inner energy within his body. He further concluded that the woman had boldly sealed his dantian, though he considered the act reckless. Azura then looked at Udah, who was lying on the ground, and decided that he had no choice but to perform an action he had not originally intended. He lightly kicked Udah from behind, asking how long Udah planned to continue lying there. However, the so-called gentle kick was far stronger than intended, sending Udah flying into the nearby wall. Udah immediately stood up, filled with anger, accusing Azura of finally revealing his true nature and demanding a proper second round of combat. Azura internally questioned whether Udah had lost his senses, wondering if the boy had a death wish. He stated that he had no time to leisurely exchange blows with Udah and needed to quickly proceed with the destruction of the remaining towers. Udah laughed awkwardly, asking why Azura believed that he would accompany him in smashing towers, arguing that instead of mindlessly destroying intact structures, they should first locate the woman's whereabouts. However, Azura suddenly shouted at Udah, calling him an idiot and questioning whether he still failed to understand the situation. He then asserted that the woman was most likely hiding within the towers, and that, in this cursed world, only the towers created by her truly existed. Azura laughed menacingly and stated that if he destroyed every tower in the world, he would eventually be able to track down the woman and kill her. Udah finally understood the meaning behind Azura's words, but remained confused as to why he was required to accompany Azura, silently concluding that the man was completely insane. Nova then whispered to Udah, warning that Azura was far too dangerous regardless of how the situation was viewed. She reminded Udah that Azura had shattered Udah's stat window on a mere whim and suggested that staying close to him might lead to unpredictable and potentially catastrophic consequences. At that moment, Azura asked Nova what she had been whispering about, causing Nova to panic and quickly hide behind Udah. Azura stated that he did not particularly wish to travel with them either, explaining that he merely found Udah's swordsmanship somewhat useful. He added that Udah resembled him in one way since both of them were pursuing the woman, though he emphasized that Udah's physical condition was far too weak to confront her alone. For that reason, Azura decided to strengthen Udah's body in a single attempt in the near future. Several days later, a massive tower appeared in the distance, accompanied by the sound of approaching footsteps and a voice announcing that they had finally arrived. Azura stared at the towering structure, stating internally that he could now see the complete form of the tower created by the woman. Turning slightly with a smile, he remarked that Nova had grown significantly stronger within a few days, though he judged that with the current state of the boy's body, his usefulness would remain minimal but not completely non-existent. Nova's appearance had changed drastically from her original form, and she expressed gratitude toward Azura by addressing him as her master. Azura acknowledged her potential, stating that Nova possessed genuine talent, and added that with slightly more time, she might have been able to properly cultivate inner energy techniques. Nova denied the claim, insisting that everything she had achieved was solely due to Master Azura's guidance and teaching. Azura then turned his attention toward Udah and, with a disappointed expression, stated that he had not expected Udah to perform even worse than Nova, who was technically his subordinate, and bluntly labeled Udah as pathetic. Udah, breathing heavily, told the two that he was following behind them and, with the appearance of someone nearing the point of exhaustion, asked them to wait for a short while. Remembering his training, he wondered how he was supposed to run while carrying something as heavy as a log, comparing the experience to harsh Marine boot camp training, and silently questioned what had happened to the once adorable Nova, whose appearance had changed completely. Lying on the ground and struggling to breathe, Udah believed that he could not take even a single additional step forward. Azura glanced at him and called him a pathetic brat, remarking that Udah had barely managed to keep up with their pace. Azura then described the tower as strangely shaped and even more grotesque than the one they had destroyed previously. Nova asked her master whether they were planning to enter the tower immediately, noting that she could not detect anything resembling an entrance. Azura addressed Nova as his disciple and stated that structures such as entrances were unnecessary, explaining that their only purpose there was to reduce the tower to rubble. Nova responded that such an approach was exactly what she expected from her master and predicted that he would destroy the tower with a single strike. Udah, looking pale and completely stunned, urged them to pause for a moment and carefully reconsider their actions before proceeding further. However, Azura did not hesitate even for a second and unleashed a devastating strike toward the tower, triggering a system warning indicating that a critical error had occurred. Azura was momentarily surprised by the unexpected notification, while the system announced that a forced transfer into the tower's interior had been initiated. The tower then exploded into millions of fragments, leaving Udah visibly troubled as he stretched out his hand and questioned whether Azura had lost his sanity, reminding him that he had asked for careful consideration before acting. A short time later, the scene shifted to an abandoned city where a brilliant purple light suddenly appeared at the center, transporting the three individuals to the location. Azura looked around in confusion, observing the strange and eerie buildings while Nova gradually returned to her original form. Udah scanned his surroundings and realized that he was standing inside a city. Nova was shocked, wondering whether they had somehow returned to their original world, but Udah soon noticed several motionless bodies lying scattered in the distance, belonging to players he recognized. The sight of numerous corpses caused Udah to question why so many bodies were present, and he concluded that the place could not be the world he once lived in. He struggled to understand where they had been sent. At that moment, purple energy began flowing out from the bodies of the fallen players, drawing Azura's attention as he observed the phenomenon and questioned its meaning. While analyzing the situation, Azura speculated that the souls of the dead might be gathering in a single location. Soon afterward, an unknown voice echoed through the area, describing the situation as intriguing. A mysterious man was seen floating in the air as purple energy converged toward him. Turning his gaze toward Azura, the man declared that regardless of how much Azura struggled, only he would be able to reach the summit of the tower. Raising his hand, the man released a surge of purple energy that summoned a gigantic skeletal entity rising from beneath the ground. Udah immediately sensed that the summoned skeleton was far from ordinary, realizing that its presence was on an entirely different and far more terrifying level than anything he had encountered before. The purple-eyed skeleton roared as it rose from the ground, prompting Udah to shout at Azura and warn him that the creature was extremely dangerous and that they needed to escape immediately. However, Azura prepared his attack without hesitation, wearing a menacing smile as he stated internally that such a monster was not worthy of being considered dangerous to someone of his level. When a skeleton attempted to block Azura's strike, the collision triggered a massive explosion, and as the dust settled, Azura stood tall while declaring the skeleton to be worthless trash. Large cracks spread across the skeleton's body, and Azura mocked its level of strength, stating that it was foolish for the creature to believe it had any chance of victory with such limited power. Turning his attention toward the mysterious man, Azura called him arrogant, laughable, and a coward for hiding behind monsters. The man was confused by the accusation that he was concealing himself behind a monster. At that moment, several additional unknown monsters emerged behind the man, who then remarked that Azura's words were entertaining. Annoyed, the man declared that he had changed his mind and ordered Azura to struggle as much as possible, intending to measure how long Azura could survive the test. The monsters immediately charged toward Azura, and he smiled upon hearing that he would be tested. Raising his hand, he addressed the mysterious man as an insignificant existence, foolishly attempting to evaluate him. With a simple wave of his hand, one of the monsters was sent crashing backward into a wall at extreme speed. Another skeleton used the chains wrapped around its body to entangle Azura, wrapping them tightly around him. Yet Azura remained completely motionless. At that moment, another monster attacked Azura from behind, unleashing a powerful strike that caused a massive explosion. However, once the attack ended, the monster's head and body were found sliced into multiple fragments, the result of Azura's own counterattack. Soon afterward, Azura heard the command to summon more creatures, and numerous monsters began materializing out of thin air. Azura showed no sign of panic upon seeing the overwhelming number of monsters surrounding him. Instead, he forcefully stomped one foot onto the ground, cracking the surface beneath him and sending shockwaves through the battlefield, plunging the monsters into disarray at the center of the destruction. At that moment, a red monster attempted a surprise attack from behind, unleashing a powerful strike aimed at Azura. However, Azura effortlessly blocked the attack with a single arm just as it was about to land. The man continued summoning more monsters in an attempt to restrain Azura, though Azura's expression gradually showed growing annoyance at the situation. The man then spoke, stating that he could not understand Azura's existence, since Azura possessed no detectable statistics and no visible skill signatures, leaving him puzzled about how such overwhelming power could exist without system recognition. Azura remained silent, staring at the man without responding. The man then drew two magical swords and declared internally that there was no need for further conversation, explaining that he would simply absorb Azura's soul to uncover the truth himself. Activating a skill known as Death Mark, he charged directly toward Azura. When the attack struck, a tremendous explosion erupted, forcing Udah and Nova to retreat due to the overwhelming destructive force released by the impact. Udah was shocked by the terrifying level of destruction displayed by the man, realizing that in a direct one-on-one confrontation, the man might be evenly matched with Azura. He wondered about the true identity of the mysterious individual. Nova urged Udah to flee, stating that the man was no longer comparable to an ordinary player, and admitted that although she did not fully understand the reason, she could clearly sense the presence of power similar to that of the goddess Ashwa. Moments later, the city lay in ruins as a result of the intense battle. The man declared that Azura had become the final remaining soul target, describing him as a highly troublesome existence. However, he added that with this outcome, his contract with the goddess Ashwa was now complete. Raising his hand and referring to Azura as an unknown player, he activated the authority skill known as Soul Absorption, stating internally that Azura's soul would be put to proper use. At that moment, Azura shattered the man's skill by forcing his way through it and finished off the nearby monsters with a single strike, leaving the man completely shocked by the outcome. Hearing the man speak about the woman he referred to as a goddess, Azura questioned whether he was talking about the accursed woman who had sealed Azura's dantian. Azura then stated that he was merely searching for that woman, and that the situation had unexpectedly become convenient for him. Wearing a menacing expression, Azura warned the man that if he wished to live, he must reveal the location of the goddess. Hearing this, the man internally concluded that the outcome was inevitable and that capturing the final soul would not be an easy task. Power surged through the man as he declared that the person destined to die inside the tower would not be him, but Azura himself. Immediately afterward, the man launched a barrage of attacks using summoned swords, though Azura casually deflected all of them, as if brushing away insignificant insects. Azura caught one of the thrown blades midair and hurled it back toward the man with tremendous speed. The knife narrowly missed the man's head, passing just beside him before striking the wall behind him and triggering a massive explosion. Observing the attack, the man laughed loudly, calling Azura an incomprehensible existence. He then admitted that he would no longer deny Azura's strength and would face him with full seriousness. Activating another skill known as Armor of Death King, Hades Armor, the man surged forward at maximum speed. Raising both swords, he prepared to strike while internally mocking Azura and questioning whether he would be able to withstand the incoming attack. The man unleashed a powerful attack, but Azura easily evaded it, laughing menacingly as he questioned whether that was the extent of the man's abilities. Furious, the man declared that he was far from finished and launched himself high into the air, preparing another devastating strike. Azura simultaneously gathered power within his fist, agreeing that the confrontation was far from over. As the man's attack descended, Azura blocked it with his fist, stating that the difference in their strength was far too great for the man to inflict any meaningful damage. A massive explosion erupted from the collision, and when the dust cleared, the man was still standing, laughing loudly as he acknowledged Azura's strength while claiming it would only last for a brief moment. The man then announced that he intended to reveal the truth, explaining that the goddess Asura was the one who had granted him authority over the tower. However, he admitted that he had not yet obtained complete control over the tower's authority. To achieve that, he formed a contract with goddess Asura, promising to offer 10,000 player souls in exchange for being reborn as the true heir of the tower. At that moment, Nova was revealed to have been captured, and the man smiled menacingly, declaring that with the young girl in his possession, he had successfully gathered all required souls. Upon seeing Nova, Udah called out to her in panic and rushed toward the man while demanding to know what had been done to her. The man dismissed Udah as insignificant and ordered him to stay out of the way. Suddenly, a massive monster emerged behind Udah and struck him with overwhelming force, causing Udah to cough up blood before collapsing lifelessly to the ground. Standing tall amidst his army of monsters, the man declared that Azura and Udah were now powerless to resist him. The system announced that the man had successfully collected the final 10,000 souls and that all tower authority would soon be unlocked, with 1 minute and 4 seconds remaining until full activation. Observing the situation, Azura deduced that the man was a necromancer who specialized in controlling vengeful spirits. He noted that similar practitioners of such forbidden techniques had existed within his own kingdom, recalling the presence of vile demonic cults that had once practiced corrupt sorcery. Azura began gathering green energy within his hand and stated internally that he would normally never employ such unclean techniques, but the man had crossed a line far beyond what he considered tolerable. He resolved to demonstrate the true form of necromancy and allow the man to witness the power of authentic soul manipulation. At that moment, the collected spirits began flowing out from the man's body, and the man watched in disbelief as the souls he had gathered were forcibly taken by Azura. He could not comprehend how such an act was possible, since it should have been fundamentally impossible within the system's rules. Soon afterward, the souls of Udah and Nova also emerged from their physical bodies and were brought under Azura's control. Azura commanded them to unleash their instincts freely, declaring internally that from that moment forward, they would become the instruments used to crush the accursed man who had caused their suffering. Udah regained consciousness at that moment, feeling confused by the situation and briefly questioning whether he had already died. Examining himself, he wondered if his current state was that of a spirit. Turning toward Azura, Udah asked whether Azura was responsible for what had happened and demanded the immediate return of his physical body. Azura responded with visible irritation, questioning who Udah believed he was accusing, and stated that if Udah had remained in that condition, he would have already been dead. Azura clarified that the separation of Udah's soul from his body was not his doing, but rather the work of the unknown man. The man had attempted to use necromancy to control Udah and the other souls as if they were puppets. To counter the attack, Azura used his own necromantic power to break the man's control, separating Udah's soul from his body and allowing the body to gradually recover. He then told Udah to stop complaining and follow his instructions. Azura also revealed that he had absorbed several of the souls controlled by the man, rendering the opponent significantly weakened. Looking at his own body, Udah realized that even after receiving the power of necromancy, he did not feel any substantial change. Nevertheless, both Udah and Nova became energized, and Azura instructed them to demonstrate the true strength of authentic necromantic power. The man stepped forward in anger, furious that his souls had been stolen and dismissing the idea that he had been reduced to nothing. He mocked Azura, claiming that the stolen souls were insignificant and that only 2 souls had been taken, which he described as the true essence of necromantic power. Azura laughed at the statement, finding it absurd that the man continued measuring strength through meaningless numerical comparison. At that moment, Udah charged toward one of the monsters at full speed, and before the creature could react, it was instantly cleaved into 2 halves. Witnessing this, the man was shocked by the sudden and effortless display of power. The man was shocked by the sudden surge of power displayed by Udah and wondered where such strength had come from, considering that only moments earlier Udah had been barely clinging to life. As the city lay in further ruin, 2 monsters charged toward Nova, and as they were about to strike, Nova remained completely motionless, causing Udah to become worried and question whether she had yet regained consciousness. However, just as the monsters were about to attack, something within Nova awakened. In less than a second, the heads of the approaching monsters were violently destroyed, scattering into fragments. A massive explosion followed, and Nova finally regained full awareness while wondering what had just happened. Azura stood silently observing the situation, while Udah immediately asked Nova if she was unharmed. Nova responded that she felt unusually strong. Udah also stated that he felt significantly stronger after obtaining necromantic power, though he recognized that continuing the battle in this manner would lead to an endless cycle of combat. At that moment, additional monsters began appearing once more, and Azura continued standing in silence while carefully observing the situation. The man then checked his system interface, prompting Azura to finally speak and explain that defeating the man required first destroying the repulsive blue status window. However, Azura acknowledged that his Dantian was currently sealed, preventing the use of internal energy, making the destruction of the interface difficult. Udah asked whether there was still a possible method of victory and questioned whether necromancy could still be used despite the sealing of Azura's Dantian. Azura agreed, explaining that even without internal energy, external energy manipulation posed no difficulty for him. He further stated that with sufficient external energy, he could generate force comparable to internal martial power. While speaking, Azura turned his attention toward Nova, remarking that her energy possessed an unusual and intriguing quality. He then addressed Nova, instructing her to offer her soul to him, a statement that left her visibly shocked. The system issued a warning indicating that there were not enough souls available to satisfy the quest requirements and instructed the man to obtain additional souls to complete the mission. The man appeared enraged, cursing the interference of those he considered insignificant, believing that their presence was wasting the souls he needed for the quest. However, he concluded that he could still gather more souls and first needed to eliminate the obstacles standing in his way. Raising his hand, the man summoned the souls under his control and commanded them to sweep away all enemies before him. The monsters immediately charged toward the 3 opponents. Azura, maintaining a confident expression, instructed Udah to remember that he would only have one opportunity to succeed and urged him to trust Azura completely while pouring all available strength into the effort. Azura then ordered Udah to clear a path so that he could reach the man. Gripping his sword tightly, Udah declared internally that his trust in Azura was not solely based on confidence in the man himself, but also on his determination to protect Nova and himself. With that resolve, Udah wasted no time and charged toward the enemies, activating the holy sword of Asterian skill. Meanwhile, the man mocked Azura and the others as fools for exhausting all their power merely to eliminate the surrounding horde, laughing menacingly while declaring that such effort was completely futile. He stated that their strength was far from sufficient to control the massive number of souls he had accumulated. However, at that moment, Azura suddenly appeared directly in front of the man and remarked that the man behaved exactly as expected of a coward. Azura revealed that he had been observing the man's repeated use of the blue status window to monitor the death of every spirit under his control. Clenching his fist tightly while Nova supported him from behind, Azura declared that the man's exhausting necromantic game would end there. With those words, Azura struck the man's status window with a powerful punch. A massive explosion erupted in the man's interface, now revealing his true identity as Lee Chanwoo along with all displayed statistics, shattered into countless fragments under the force of the attack. Lee Chanwoo stood in complete shock, unable to accept that everything he had possessed had been destroyed so easily and humiliatingly. He internally refused to acknowledge the loss of his status window, his accumulated power, and the world he had constructed. At that moment, an error notification appeared, indicating that the soul data registered within the system had become corrupted, resulting in the permanent deletion of all stored souls and the failure of the heir's ritual quest. Udah was lying on the ground after returning to his original physical body, and upon regaining consciousness, he wondered whether he had truly been restored to his original state. Clutching the area where he had once been pierced by the monster's attack, he realized with surprise that his body had healed exactly as Azura had promised, filling him with astonishment. Udah began questioning the true identity of Azura and the limits of the man's power. Meanwhile, Lee was thrown into a state of emotional breakdown, refusing to accept what had occurred and repeatedly insisting that the situation could not end in such a manner. He blamed Azura for the outcome, trembling with rage and tears as he shouted internally that he had lost the only method he possessed to save his world from impending destruction. In the past, as people fled in panic from the spreading chaos, Lee had been quietly listening to music through his headphones. Noticing the fleeing crowd, he removed his headphones and saw multiple portals suddenly opening across the sky. Shock filled Lee's expression as he observed the phenomenon. Moments later, the city had fallen into complete ruin due to the rampaging monsters. Bodies lay scattered across the ground with no remaining signs of life, except for Lee, who remained on his knees in a state of stunned despair amid the devastation. At that moment, while Lee was contemplating his next course of action, the goddess Ashwa suddenly appeared before him, and from that encounter, the events ultimately led to the present situation. Hearing this, Udah questioned Lee's sudden change of topic and asked what Lee meant by the destruction of his world. Udah further asked whether Lee was not a player summoned from another world just like himself and the others, wondering why Lee's world would suddenly face annihilation. Lee explained that when he was first summoned as a player, his world was marked for destruction due to an approaching monster wave. He revealed that his sole motivation had been to save his world at any cost, believing that he could achieve that goal through the power granted to him. Driven by the determination to save everyone, he climbed the tower with a single objective, eventually discovering the truth that whoever conquered the tower would gain the authority to create a new world. Udah was shocked to learn that such a power existed, realizing that the tower's ultimate reward was the ability to construct an entirely new world. Lee confirmed this, stating that his intention had been to use that authority to reconstruct his destroyed world inside the tower, restoring it exactly as it had been before its destruction. He wanted to protect and save his people using his own strength, believing that he had finally obtained the power to safeguard everyone. Clenching his fist, Lee blamed them for ruining everything, insisting that if they had not interfered, the quest would have already been completed by that point. Azura spoke, telling Lee to preserve his cowardly justifications and openly labeled him a coward. He stated that someone like Lee would never be able to save anyone, much less an entire world. Azura then questioned why Lee had fled when his world was actually approaching destruction, arguing that Lee had never truly intended to save his people in the first place. He further challenged Lee's claim by asking whether Lee had sought the power to recreate a world rather than the power to genuinely save it, suggesting that Lee's ambition was nothing more than a meaningless numerical game. Azura then stated that Lee was foolish to believe he could rebuild the world using such power, emphasizing that attempting such an act within the tower held no real meaning. Stepping forward, Azura declared that since Lee appeared to have lost his grasp on reality due to grief, he intended to teach him a harsh truth. He asserted that Lee had merely sought escape from his suffering and wished to become a hero in a fabricated sense. Lee suddenly shouted for Azura to be silent before charging forward in anger, but Azura struck him with a powerful blow that sent him flying backward at high speed. Coughing blood and struggling to breathe after the attack, Lee internally rejected Azura's words, believing that Azura was mistaken and that Lee's true intention had always been to save everyone. At that moment, he recalled his encounter with the goddess, who had addressed him as a player and informed him that he had successfully cleared all stages of the tower. She had further explained that if he wished, he could return to his world to confront the monster wave at the moment, just before its destruction, and attempt to save it. Lee remained completely expressionless upon remembering those words. The goddess then presented another choice, proposing that Lee could accept a special quest, inherit the tower's authority, and recreate his world inside the tower itself. She instructed him to make a decision and asked whether he would return to his original world to fight the monster wave and become a hero trapped in an endless war, or instead construct the world he desired within the tower and become its savior. Lee faced the goddess without showing any emotion and declared that he would inherit the tower's power and save his own world. Returning to the present, a system notification suddenly appeared, warning that the tower structure was collapsing and that all stored data would be permanently erased as the tower itself began to disintegrate. Udah questioned what was happening and whether the tower was truly collapsing. He called out to Azura, asking what they should do since they would be crushed along with the falling tower if nothing was done. At that moment, Lee spoke and revealed that the goddess Ashwa had once told him that all towers in this world ultimately converged into a single path. He admitted that he did not fully understand the meaning behind the single path, but speculated that reaching its end might allow them to encounter goddess Ashwa. Lee then told the others that if they wished to find Ashwa, they would need to follow that path. Udah asked Lee what he meant by the single path and questioned why he was choosing to share that information with them. Lee answered that the suppressed memories he had tried so hard to forget had resurfaced, forcing him to realize that Azura's words were correct. He was simply a coward who had chosen to escape a cruel reality by pretending to be a hero. He further stated that acknowledging this truth now would not change anything, since he had already forfeited the opportunity to return to his original world. Having abandoned that choice, he believed he no longer had any reason to continue living within a world he considered empty. Lee then informed them that the exit was located at the rear of the tower and warned that delaying their escape might cause even that passage to vanish as the structure continued collapsing. He urged them to leave before the tower fully disintegrated. Upon hearing this, Azura asked whether Lee intended to remain behind. When Lee confirmed his decision, Azura accepted it, describing Lee as a coward but not someone utterly pathetic, and instructed him to do as he wished. As Azura walked away, he stated that if he eventually encountered the goddess and destroyed her, he would also consider avenging Lee in his own way. Udah called out to Azura, questioning whether they truly intended to abandon Lee. He suggested that Lee could accompany them in their search for Ashwa. However, Azura ordered Udah to remain silent, explaining that Lee had already lost a life-and-death battle. He added that in such battles, the victor shows mercy by allowing the defeated opponent to choose the place where he would meet death, and that such mercy was among the greatest that could be granted. Udah remained unsatisfied with leaving Lee behind, but Nova warned him that time was running out and that the entire tower was on the verge of total collapse. Gritting his teeth, Udah acknowledged the warning, yet he lifted Lee onto his back in a piggyback carry, refusing to abandon a person's life simply because of defeat. Nova watched in surprise at Udah's unexpected action. Unable to move after the battle, Lee asked Udah what he was doing, stating that he had no remaining purpose or power, and that even if he left the tower, there was nothing left in his life worth continuing. Udah shouted at Lee, insisting that even if he had no purpose at that moment, he would eventually find one if he continued living, and warned Lee not to throw his life away. Lee remained silent for a moment after hearing those words. He then asked for Udah's name, causing Udah to question why such information was being requested in a situation like that. Udah then revealed his name and asked whether Lee felt satisfied knowing it. Lee remarked that it was an unusual name. Udah then asked for Lee's name, and Lee provided it, prompting Udah to comment that Lee's name was not particularly impressive either. Changing the subject, Lee stated that he had one final request and handed a glowing golden magical sphere to Udah, surprising him. Lee instructed Udah to use the power contained within it for a righteous purpose. Udah demanded to know the meaning behind the gesture and told Lee to take the sphere back, insisting that he had never asked for such power. However, Lee was already beginning to fade away slowly. He explained that even if he left the tower, he would eventually cease to exist because without this system's support, maintaining his physical form would be impossible. As his body continued dissolving, he called Udah's name and told him to return to his original world. Tears filled Udah's eyes as he held the magical sphere and watched Lee vanish completely from sight. At that moment, the system issued a warning indicating that the tower was about to collapse completely, with only 1 second remaining on the timer. When the countdown reached 0, the system confirmed that all tower data would be permanently erased. Immediately afterward, a massive black hole appeared and swallowed the entire tower. After several moments, the system notified that the tower had completely vanished. In another location, the goddess sat observing the situation with a visibly irritated expression. Suddenly, she stood up and spoke with a menacing smile, dismissing the destruction as merely the loss of a single tower and referring to Azura as a statless player, challenging him to exert greater effort. Returning to the main scene, the system announced that all tower data had been deleted. Udah remained shocked by the sudden disappearance of everything around him. He began questioning whether it had already been too late to save Lee the moment the status window shattered. He recalled that when a player's status window was destroyed, the physical body would also perish, leading him to realize that he should have died as well. This made him wonder why he had survived, unlike Lee. He also questioned whether any portion of system power still remained within his body. Azura stepped forward and asked why Udah had been wearing such a serious expression for some time. He further asked whether Udah was thinking about the death of the Spirit Master, and upon observing Udah's expression, he concluded that Udah was more sentimental than he appeared. Udah asked if Azura intended to begin lecturing him again. Udah admitted that he felt uneasy about Lee, acknowledging that Lee had indeed been an enemy, but the feeling left behind was strangely bittersweet. At the end, he held the object Lee had entrusted to him, remembering the instruction to use it for the right purpose and to eventually return to his original world. Udah stated that he did not fully understand the nature of the power contained within the object, but decided that he would first give it to Azura. He added that somehow, this felt like the correct decision at that moment and extended the glowing object toward Azura. Upon holding the object, Azura remarked that he could sense the damned goddess Chi emanating from it, and speculated that this power might be capable of unsealing his Dantian. Udah asked whether Azura would be unable to recover his full strength, but Azura told him not to jump to conclusions, explaining that only a very small portion of his sealed power could be restored using the object. Although the energy within the object felt identical to hers, it was far weaker than the chi that had originally sealed his Dantian. Udah admitted that he had been curious for some time and asked what the term Dantian meant. He further stated that Azura was exceptionally strong regardless of that concept. Azura replied that the power he currently used was external martial art, relying purely on physical bodily strength. Udah and Nova were both shocked upon hearing this. Udah asked whether Azura had been fighting using only pure physical strength ever since encountering Ashwa, while Nova simply stated that Azura was a monster. Azura explained that if his Dantian were restored, he would be able to use internal energy, a force that channels chi circulating through the body to generate strength far beyond external martial techniques. Udah asked whether internal energy was comparable to magic skills. Reflecting on the situation, Udah concluded that Azura was formidable even without a status window, strong enough to destroy both the stat window system and the tower itself. He wondered how high Azura's statistics would have been if such numbers had existed. Nova asked what Udah was thinking, and Udah admitted that he was speculating about what Azura's strength would look like if represented through statistical values. Azura then delivered a light punch to Udah's head, questioning whether Udah was still attempting to evaluate strength using those blue windows and numerical measurements. Udah, rubbing the bump on his head, remarked that Azura possessed exceptionally sharp senses in addition to overwhelming strength. He then shifted the topic and asked what Azura truly meant by strength. Hearing the question, Azura called Udah foolish. Raising his hand, he clenched his fist tightly and explained that strength was fundamentally born from blood, sweat, training, and relentless effort. Azura instructed Udah to listen carefully, explaining that to deliver a powerful punch, he had once swung his fist 1,000 times every day. He questioned whether someone who swung it 1,001 times would automatically be stronger, then answered his own question by stating that the answer was no. charging power into his fist. He continued that strength was not defined by numerical repetition beyond 1,000, but by the intensity of one's yearning for power with every strike delivered. In essence, true strength was achieved by pouring one's entire heart into the pursuit of a desired goal, and what was gained through that process was genuine strength. As he spoke, Azura unleashed a full-force punch straight forward, and the destructive force of the strike obliterated everything along its trajectory. Udah and Nova stood in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the display. Azura looked backward and asked whether the two of them understood. He then changed the subject, examining the object he was holding and stating that the real challenge was determining how to properly utilize the power contained within it. At that moment, Azura grew visibly furious, sensing the presence of numerous unknown variables surrounding the situation. He mentioned Mo internally, questioning what she had been planning by sending him to this world. In the midst of the beautiful scenery, Azura tossed the object back toward Udah and asked whether it was his first time seeing it as well. Udah confirmed this and explained that because of someone's interference, referring indirectly to Azura, his statistics had been shattered before he could complete the tower. Depressed, Udah admitted that he believed everything would end once he reached the tower's summit. Listening to Udah's explanation, Azura turned around and asked whether that individual might possess knowledge of the situation. Udah appeared confused about the person Azura was referring to. Azura repeated his question, wondering whether that person also desired the power contained within the object, and then ordered the individual in question to reveal themselves. At that moment, an unknown figure stepped forward. As the mysterious being approached, Azura speculated whether the entity was a monster that had somehow survived the tower's collapse, noting that he could not sense any red aura emanating from it. Azura asked the identity of the stranger, but the person remained silent and instead pointed their weapon directly at him. Receiving no response, Azura laughed loudly and stated that further conversation was unnecessary, instructing the opponent to attack him directly. The mysterious individual planted their feet firmly on the ground and swung a massive axe toward Azura. Azura easily evaded the strike and immediately began gathering power to counterattack. Azura then delivered a powerful punch that sent the mysterious figure flying high into the air. Fortunately, the stranger managed to block the strike using their weapon, preventing the attack from landing fully. At that moment, the mysterious figure activated the axe-style skill and leaped high into the air, preparing to unleash a devastating strike toward Azura. Immediately afterward, the individual used another technique known as Earth Splitter, causing the entire ground to shatter into countless fragments upon impact. As the smoke gradually cleared, blood droplets could be seen falling onto the ground, revealing that Azura had blocked the attack using only one arm, though his hand had sustained injury from the collision. Azura smiled and commented internally that the opponent possessed a rather solid combat stance. The mysterious figure was shocked that Azura had successfully blocked the strike. In the next moment, Azura grasped the weapon with immense force, cracking its structure as he charged forward. He stated that targeting him with such power was ultimately meaningless. Azura then struck the opponent's face with a powerful blow, cracking the mask and sending the mysterious figure flying backward at extreme speed under the force of the attack. He told the opponent to increase their level of effort. At that moment, a voice filled with anger declared that the attacker would never be forgiven. Udah turned toward the source of the voice and was surprised to see that the figure was a beautiful blonde woman. The woman, wearing an enraged expression, demanded to know why they had destroyed her tower. Udah was stunned, acknowledging that they had indeed destroyed a tower, while Nova added that they had not realized the structure belonged to the woman. The blonde woman remained visibly furious. She shouted that they should not pretend ignorance, because she had clearly witnessed the three of them destroying the tower. She then demanded to know their objective and the reason behind their actions. Azura remained silent, standing motionless while the blonde woman continued speaking. She stated that because of the three of them, she had been wandering through a desolate world for 2 years, unable to return to her original world despite having once believed she could do so. However, her words were abruptly interrupted when Azura struck the back of her head with a sharp karate chop, knocking her unconscious onto the ground. Azura then questioned why a defeated individual spoke so excessively. Udah watched the scene in shock and confusion, struggling to process what he had just witnessed and heard. After some time, as the sun began to set, The blonde woman sat on the ground and sincerely apologized to the three of them for the misunderstanding, admitting that she had nearly harmed them. She repeated her apology, while Udah and Nova responded with smiles, stating that the situation was understandable and urging her to stand up. After she rose to her feet, Udah shifted the topic and expressed surprise that she had managed to reach the tower's summit with her statistical configuration. Addressing the blonde woman by name, Kina, Udah asked whether he could examine her status window once more. Kina agreed and displayed her interface. The status window revealed that she was level 86, possessing 80,000 health points and 120,000 mana points, while her remaining stat points amounted to 86 million. Observing the display, Udah internally found the numbers unbelievable no matter how many times he reviewed them, continuing to be astonished that she had reached the tower's summit with such a build. He concluded that these values suggested she had only leveled up without allocating her stat points, and he wondered whether the woman standing before him was a combatant on the same monstrous level as Azura. Udah changed the subject and asked again whether Kina had truly stated that nothing existed at the top of the tower. Kina confirmed this, explaining that there was nothing there and that even ordinary monsters were absent. She added that instead, the system displayed error messages indicating that the available statistics were insufficient, after which the tower itself began to disappear. Reflecting on Kina's words, Udah concluded that this outcome was expected and must have been the work of a schwa. Kina reacted with surprise upon hearing the name. Udah continued by explaining that a schwa was the entity that granted them the status windows and power, and that she was the one who summoned them into the tower. He added that they were pursuing that entity in order to return to their original world. Kina then turned her attention toward Azura, remarking that he appeared to be the same type of being, but noticed that he was currently meditating. She wondered internally what he was doing at that moment. Udah also expressed confusion, acknowledging that it was a valid question.